Mr. Ocasio Cortez.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary, for coming in and offering your testimony. Under the subpoenas that we issued to DHS, your office has produced to this committee data showing that child separation skyrocketed after your zero tolerance policy went into effect. More than 2,000 children were separated from their parents in the 2 months following your memo that Secretary Nielsen accepted, some for more than a year. In making these decisions around family separation and child separation, did you all consider the emotional and mental impact on CBP officers in forcing them to take children away from their mothers and fathers?
So we absolutely consider the well-being of our professionals who are strained with the crisis they're facing. They're strained with the stories they're hearing of the dangers of the journey, the abuse of women and girls
And do you,
on the process of getting to the United States.
Thank you, reclaiming my time.
We worry about that.
And do you believe, but did you consider the dehumanizing effect on the officers, specifically in child separation, and forcing them to take children away from their parents?
Enforcing the law often has emotional impacts for everybody involved, and that's something that they sign up for, but it's something we want to provide resilient services, mental health support for anyone who needs it.
Okay, and do you agree with the federal court's decision that halted your child separation policy?
I agree with the President's executive order on June 20th last year that...
But not the federal court's decision?
Of course, we've followed the federal court order assiduously.
There have been reports that President Trump and Stephen Miller wanted to restart mass child separations earlier this year, but top DHS officials, including Secretary Nielsen, told them that this would violate the court order. Is that true?
So the President said that zero tolerance prosecutions of adults crossing with family units is not on the table at this time.
So you are saying that it's incorrect, the reports are incorrect, saying that the President wanted to restart child separation?
I'm referring to the President's public statements on this issue.
But privately,
this is not
in your
on the table,
experience?
not being considered.
So in your experience, the answer is no. He did not consider restarting child separation?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not going to speak about conversations with the President that I've personally had. I'm not aware of other deliberations between other officials.
Mr. Secretary, there were reports that the President offered you a pardon for closing the border to asylum seekers. According to a CNN report, senior administration officials told CNN that President Trump told you he would grant you a pardon if you were sent to jail for having border agents block asylum seekers from entering the U.S. in defiance of U.S. law. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've testified about this, answered this question in the media. I've never been asked to do anything unlawful by the President or anyone else, nor would I.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Secretary, are you aware of the ProPublica report indicating that there were about 10,000 potential current and former CBP officers in the violently racist and sexist Facebook group?
I am aware of the ProPublica article, yes.
Did you see any of the posts in the report?
I did.
Did you see the posts mocking migrant children's deaths?
I did.
Did you see the posts planning physical harm to myself and Congresswoman Escobar?
Yes, and I directed an investigation within minutes of reading the article.
Did you see the images of officers circulating photoshopped images of my violent rape?
Yes, I did.
Are those officers on the job today and responsible for the safety of migrant women and children?
So there's an aggressive investigation on this issue proceeding. You've heard the chief of the Border Patrol, the most senior female official in law enforcement across the entire country, say that these posts do not meet our standards of conduct, and they will be followed up aggressively.
But
we've already put individuals on administrative duties. I don't know which ones correspond with which posts, and we've issued cease and desist orders to dozens and more.
Okay. Do you think that the policy of child separation could have contributed to a dehumanizing culture within CBP that contributes and kind of spills over into other areas of conduct?
We do not have a dehumanizing culture at CBP.
Okay.
This is an agency that rescues 4,000 people a year, that's absolutely committed to the well-being of everyone that they interact with.
And
I don't believe there's a dehumanizing culture.
And Mr. Secretary, so you don't think that having 10,000 officers in a violent, racist group sharing rape memes of members of Congress points to any concern of a dehumanized culture?
Congresswoman, those posts are unacceptable. They're being investigated, but I don't think it's fair to apply them to the entire organization or that even the members of that group believed or supported those posts.
Mr. Secretary, just one last thing. How did 10,000 members join this group, including, I believe, the head of CBP? I'll double check. Including the CBP chief. How were they in this Facebook group without anybody knowing, without anyone in leadership knowing?
Again, this is the subject of an ongoing investigation. If there was supervisory knowledge of unacceptable activities, that will also be considered and followed up on.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Secretary, let me answer this.
Thank you. As chair, I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. We had a hearing a few weeks ago, first in this series on white supremacy and its growing role in the United States right now. And at this hearing, we discovered through expert witness testimony that not all of these incidents seem to be treated with the similar consistency. But we've also heard from experts that whether the FBI classifies extremist violence as, quote, domestic terrorism or a hate crime has major implications on resource allocation and prioritization within the Bureau. Mr. McGarity, the FBI considers preventing terrorism its #1 priority. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
And Mr. Shivers, what about civil rights violations, such as hate crimes? How do they rank among the FBI priorities?
Within the civil rights program, it is the #1 priority.
So within the civil rights program, but the FBI overall, doesn't it seem that FBI agents would have more of an incentive to pursue domestic terrorism cases over hate crime cases?
Well, again, sometimes those cases overlap. And so in a number of instances, you may have a civil rights investigation and a domestic terrorism investigation open.
And I do see here that the civil rights program policy instructs agents to open parallel terrorism investigations whenever a suspect of a hate crime has any nexus to a white supremacist group, correct?
Correct.
We've seen white supremacist attacks that were clearly domestic terrorism. Experts, in fact, the acting AG, Jeff Sessions, even called some of these incidents domestic terrorism incidents. The Emmanuel AME Church shooting of Black Americans in Charleston and the Tree of Life synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh of Jewish people, those were only designated and charged as hate crimes, not domestic terrorist incidents. Mr. McGarity, why did the FBI not believe that these incidents were domestic terrorist incidents?
That's not correct. I don't know who told you that we didn't, but we certainly had cases open on them in both those cases, and I wasn't here for the Dylan Roof case, but it's certainly in our own Department of Justice Civil Rights about 3-4 weeks ago, and their testimony actually stated that it was a domestic terrorism event charged through the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice for a hate crime. I was here for the Tree of Life. I will tell you, I remember that day distinctly. It was worked as both a domestic terrorism case and a hate crimes case, and it still worked that way.
And so you are disputing that the AME, you're saying that AME was charged with domestic terrorism, Dylan Roof?
So you're using the word charge. So as I said before, there's no domestic terrorism charge like 18 U.S.C. 2339 A, B, C, D for a foreign terrorist organization. So what we do, both on the international terrorism side with homegrown violent extremists and domestic terrorism, we'll use any tool in the toolkit to arrest them, hopefully left of attack. Should it be after, likely that hate crime statute will come to play through the Civil Rights Division as a charge because it's a good federal charge for us to use in
And the
these
Tree
cases.
of
But it
Life,
shouldn't be stated that it's not a domestic terrorism. In fact, on the record, it's stated it's a domestic terrorism.
and the same thing with the synagogue shooting?
Yes.
So okay, so we have two conflicting testimonies.
Well, I mean, I can go back to May 8th, 2019 from the Department of Justice. On the record, that statement called it domestic terrorism cases involving civil rights charges too, including some of the most serious attacks in recent years. Dylan Roof, African-American parishioners engaged at the Emmanuel African Methodist Church, James Field at the Unite to Right rally in Virginia, and then also Robert Bowers.
So that's the
All three
statement,
events were domestic terrorism.
but the actual charge, was the actual charge domestic terrorism?
you're not going to find an actual charge of domestic terrorism out there. If you look at Title 18, right, if you're looking for...
Well, it says here that, but at the San Bernardino shooting or the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting, they were designated and charged as domestic terrorist incidents.
They were charged, I'd have to go back and look, they were charged likely with, if there was a connection to a foreign terrorist organization, it would likely fall under 18 U.S.C. 23 A or B.
So because the perpetrator was Muslim, they are, doesn't it seem that because the perpetrator is
That's
Muslim,
not correct. That has nothing
that
to do-
the
that-
designation would
No.
say it's a foreign
No,
organization?
It's not correct. That is not correct.
Okay. Can you explain
Yeah.
why?
So, homegrown violent extremists, most of the people we arrest in the United States, homegrown violent extremists, self-radicalized, born in the U.S., doesn't matter what religion.
But the Orlando Pulse Club shooter meets those qualifications, and you're
He was
implying,
worked as an international terrorist because he was following under the definition.
But he was
of how we
homegrown
work
and
homegrown violent
self-radicalized.
extremist cases, how we work homegrown violent extremist cases under the global jihad, we worked under international terrorism. That is correct.
is white supremacy not a global issue?
It is a global issue
So why are they not charged with foreign?
because the United
Terrorism.
States Congress doesn't have a statute for us for domestic terrorism like we do on a foreign terrorist organization like ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab.
Could you see how this could create issues and discrepancies with how violent extremism by Muslim perpetrators could potentially, even if it's unintentional, but that there are holes and there are gaps here, not through your fault or any one specific person's fault. It could be our fault as Congress. But could you see how one could see how the way that we are pursuing and charging white supremacy, particularly if they tend to be charged with hate crimes and where that same type of violence committed by a Muslim extremist could be charged with domestic terrorism. Hate crimes and domestic terrorism are treated and charged, they're different crimes, and they could be pursued differently with different resource allocations. Can you see how people would say that these are being treated differently?
Some of the definitions we're using, I think we're talking past each other. But I will tell you from the domestic terrorism side and on the international terrorism side, on the domestic terrorism side, we don't charge, of those approximately 115 arrests we did last year, not all of them were hate crime charges. We're going to charge someone left of attack with any charge we have under Title 18 in the U.S. Code or a state and local charge. So predominantly, I would say I'd have to go back and look, most of them are not hate crime charges on the domestic terrorism side.
Okay. Thank you very much. I will now move to recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair.